U.S. Marines outnumbered and under fire. One ship responds heroically. A massive enemy fleet bears down. With little chance for survival, the captain orders his ship to attack. A sudden explosion sends a huge fireball throughout the ship. The captain makes a fateful decision. He must stop fighting the fires or let his ship sink. What kind of men and women answer the call to defend her every time? What sort of crew prove again and again that there's no higher honor than to command the USS Samuel B. Roberts?
At 30 knots.
We got the boat deck main ready. We're closing right now. Contacts at 10,000 RPM. Visuals off the port bow.
20 miles east of Jacksonville, Florida, the USS Samuel B. Roberts pursues a high-speed boat suspected of carrying a load of cocaine.
We're still at 30 knots right now at the contact at 4,600 yards.
I got white smoke coming out of the CLC classroom.
Roger, sounding alarm to all decks.
Suddenly, a fire breaks out below deck. Damage control teams race to the scene. Back on the bridge, the officer of the deck receives a startling report. An enemy submarine is approaching off the starboard bow. A helicopter races to counterattack, armed with its own torpedoes. This is not the coordinated work of a foreign nation or a group of terrorists, nor is it a perfect storm of conflicting scenarios. It's just another day aboard the Sammy B, where drills are a way of life.
We're in an environment where we are stressing our crew right now. We do that by design. We train hard, we train often.
Go fast on a visual at 123, 2.5 nautical miles.
We run drills with the Anti-Terrorism Force Protection Training Team, the Combat Systems Training Team, and after we get done with this, tonight we'll be running Engineering Training Team drills for the people down inside the main spaces.
It's grueling. Sometimes we're doing the same thing over and over, but you got to be proficient at what we do.
Good job, fellas, good job.
On her first day at sea, Naval Academy graduate Ensign Christy Campbell must adapt quickly to the hectic pace.
My day started at 3:30 in the morning and then didn't end until midnight when I got off watch. And so the sleep deprivation that I learned to function with at the Naval Academy is definitely just kicking right back in.
In a few short months, the Roberts will set sail for South America. There, she will deploy as part of a small strike group whose primary mission will be to intercept the flow of illegal drugs coming up through the Caribbean.
We got a full and packed day for the next 24 to 48 hours.
To prepare for this new assignment, the crew has embarked on an intensive 3-day training exercise in conjunction with the U.S. Coast Guard. Together, they'll learn to integrate multiple aspects, including tracking, intercepting, reporting, boarding, and seizing suspect vessels.
And they'll be able to apply that through a myriad of situations that we've either trained for or have not foreseen, because there are always going to be situations that occur that we simply haven't planned for.
Mark your head.
01006.
Commander Weeks speaks from a certain knowledge that if anyone in the U.S. Navy should know about unforeseen disasters, it's the captain of the Sammy B. Roberts, considered by many the most heroic name in the United States Navy.
The legacy of the Sammy B. Roberts is tremendous, and from my perspective of command, that's a tremendous honor and somewhat of a burden to carry that on in trying to live up to that heritage.
The history and heritage of the Sammy B started during World War II with a 21-year-old naval reservist from San Francisco, Samuel Booker Roberts, Jr. During the invasion of Guadalcanal in August 1942, Roberts served as coxswain, commanding a Higgins boat ferrying men and material onto the beachhead. When a Japanese counterstrike forced the Navy to pull back, Roberts remained on the island.
Roberts, along with some other coxswains and some Coast Guardsmen, set up a post down at Lunga Point on Guadalcanal and ran these wooden Higgins boats up the coast to resupply the Marines who were doing the fighting in the interior of the island.
On September 27th, Roberts and several other coxswains ferried a company of Marines north of Lunga Point to a beach near the Matanacao River.
They dropped the Marines off. Almost immediately, the Marines came under heavy fire. So Roberts and his bunch went back and started extracting the Marines, and the fire was coming off for the beach like crazy.
The heavy fire threatened the rescue, so Roberts voluntarily drove his boat directly in front of the Japanese, drawing their attention. The distraction enabled the other boat crews to evacuate the Marines. But then, as Roberts withdrew, enemy machine gun fire raked his boat and mortally wounded the young coxswain in the neck.
His valor in the action was such that the Navy awarded him a Navy Cross, one of the highest decorations the Navy bestows. A year later, they gave him an even rarer honor. They named a ship after him.
On April 28, 1944, in Houston, Texas, the U.S. Navy commissioned DE-413, a Butler-class destroyer escort, the Samuel B. Roberts. Her initial complement included 222 sailors, including the captain, Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland. Compared to the massive carriers and battleships dominating the high seas, destroyer escorts were both slow and small. This, along with a thin hull, helped inspire their nickname, Tin Cans.
When you compare a destroyer escort to a heavy cruiser, it's like comparing a little rowboat to a big cabin cruiser.
But destroyer escorts weren't built to fight other surface ships. Their role in a fleet was as an outside screen protecting carriers against enemy planes, and especially submarines.
They had all the latest sound gear. They had depth charges. And they had what they called a hedgehog, which was a rocket-type weapon.
After her shakedown cruise, the Roberts set sail for the Western Pacific, where she joined the largest invasion fleet ever assembled.
There must have been 1,000 ships there, all kinds of ships, aircraft carriers, battleships, everything.
This was the 7th Fleet, and it was headed for Leyte Island in the Philippines.
The Sammy B was assigned to Taffy 3, a small task force consisting of 6 small carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. They sat outside the San Bernardino Strait, protecting a northern approach to Leyte Island. To their north was Admiral William Halsey's 3rd Fleet, a powerful armada of fast carriers, battleships, and cruisers. Late on the evening of October 24th, Jack Hewson was on watch when he saw lights flashing in the skies.
I was on watch, and we see like it was thundering and lightning in the skies. But it wasn't that. It was the big battle of Surigao Strait going on.
75 miles south, a Japanese naval force sails into Surigao Strait in an attempt to attack the invasion force at Leyte. But the 7th Fleet's torpedo boats, destroyers, and cruisers intercepted them, sinking several of the Imperial warships and forcing the others to retreat. The next morning, Japanese ships appear on the horizon.
The executive officer got on the PA system. That anybody wanted to see the Japanese fleet fleeing, he come topside.
They thought for a moment that they might be the remnants of the defeated fleet from the battle the night before.
About that time, we could see looked like a signal light or something on the horizon. but it wasn't. It was a flash.
We could hear the guns rumbling 18 miles away.
Before you know it, a spout of water come up alongside of you. Then you start seeing masts coming up over the horizon.
The Japanese force, mistakenly thought to be fleeing, was actually coming in fast for an attack. They dwarfed Taffy 3's small fleet. Taffy 3's commander, Rear Admiral Ziggy Sprague, looked north to Admiral Halsey for protection, but he was gone. During the night, Halsey had pulled his fleet out of the area, lured away by a decoy Japanese carrier group. Incredibly, he failed to communicate this to Sprague. That left Sprague's fleet of tin cans, the only force guarding the American troop ships at Leyte.
They were essentially cargo and passenger ships, and they had carried their thousands upon thousands of troops to the beachhead, and were now in Leyte Gulf, all but defenseless.
Admiral Sprague looked out at the enemy fleet arrayed in front of him. He estimated Taffy 3 had about 15 minutes to live. At 8:15 a.m. on the morning of October 25, 1944, Commander Robert Copeland and the crew of the USS Samuel B. Roberts were at General Quarters. Bearing down on them and the 12 other tin cans comprising Taffy 3 were some of the Japanese Navy's most powerful warships. The combined Imperial force brought to bear dozens of 8, 14, and 16-inch guns, far outclassing anything in the American arsenal.
The biggest gun we had in our group was 5-inch guns. It would be like a grade school playing football against the Chicago Bears.
Taffy 3's commander, Rear Admiral Ziggy Sprague, immediately ordered his ships to lay a smokescreen and to steam away as fast as possible. He also alerted his carrier commanders to get every plane up in the air and on the attack.
Some of them had half tanks gas, no bullets, no bombs. They took off to get off the carrier, to make dummy runs on them and just try to do some damage to the Japanese coming at us.
The dummy runs and smokescreen had little effect. In a matter of minutes, the faster Japanese ships close in on the fleeing Americans.
Eventually, the Japanese gunners began dialing in their shots, and so once they found their range, Sprague realized that the jig was up, and he conceived a very audacious but last-ditch effort. He would send the small boys after the oncoming fleet and continue to run south with his carriers.
Then the skipper got on the PA system, and he told us what was going on. He said, "You don't know if any of us will come out of this alive, but we'll do as much damage as we can."
Their 5-inch guns really had no prayer of penetrating the Japanese armor, but they went right at these Japanese battleships and Japanese cruisers.
Meantime, shells are coming right at us, splashing all around the place.
When the Sammy B got within 4,000 yards of the Japanese cruiser Chokai, Commander Copeland ordered a spread of torpedoes. Several long minutes later, the torpedoes slammed their target.
One of our torpedoes blew off the stern of that cruiser, and we all were young enough, kids enough, that we were cheering like it was a baseball game, you know, where we didn't realize, boy, this is real.
Elsewhere, Taffy 3's other tin cans attacked with everything and anything they could muster. Amazingly, The aggressive action fooled the Japanese commanders into believing they were facing Halsey's powerful Third Fleet. Admiral Takeo Kurita proceeded cautiously.
Those Japanese crews didn't have a clue what was coming at them because all they saw were these U.S. ships firing away. But it really freaked them out.
As the battle raged into its second hour, the tin cans had inflicted severe damage to several Japanese warships, but they too suffered. Several of the American destroyers sat on fire, dead in the water. Casualties numbered in the hundreds. Miraculously, for over 90 minutes, the Sammy B had avoided being hit, but shortly before 9 a.m., the Japanese battleship Kongo found her range. From over 2 miles away, her gun crews fired 1,485-pound shells at the Roberts, hitting as close as 50 yards astern. Huge splashes covered the deck with water. On the bridge, Commander Copeland desperately maneuvered his ship, but at 8:51 a.m., his luck finally ran out.
We had an 8-inch shell go through our lower magazine. Went in above the waterline and went out below the waterline.
It went right in the port, out to starboard, then exploded. But it took the bow up out of the water.
2 more 8-inch shells sliced through the Sammy B, causing water to pour into the ship's lower levels. Another salvo took out the engine and 40-millimeter gun emplacement.
The gun exploded. Most of everybody was killed. The trainer, the pointer, and the fuse setter was blown out through the side of the gun into the water.
All of a sudden we heard, abandon ship, every man for himself. I looked at a couple of my young shipmates and I said, what does he mean by every man for himself?
We had 3 rafts go into the water. A lot of the guys come down the cargo net, some of them jump.
Commander Copeland and the surviving crew members suddenly found themselves clinging to life rafts in shark-infested waters 45 miles from shore.
When we watched the ship go down, it didn't sink in at the time, but we lost our home. And we also lost some friends, shipmates.
He said, well, we'll get picked up. But night came. And I want to tell you, that was scary. We had no food, no water, no medicines. We had a lot of guys who were banged up. Pretty bad.
No rescue efforts came the next day. Several men made a desperate effort to swim for shore and were never seen again. Others, too weak to survive, floated down into the sea.
We were in the water up to here all the time. And I was dozing. All of a sudden, I felt something hit my leg, under the water. I sort of woke up, and I looked down, and there was a tiger shark smacking me on my leg. And I said, oh, God, get him away from me. Oh, God. I looked down, and he was gone. About 20 seconds later, something like that, there was a yelp. About 2 or 3 guys down from me, took both his legs off.
On the morning of the second day, an American landing craft finally reached the survivors.
We yelling at him, you know, and he came around and he said, who won the World Series? And we yelled out, St. Louis Cardinals. And you could hear his engines, the bells ringing, full stop. And that's how we got saved.
It was only after being rescued that Commander Copeland and the rest of the Roberts crew found out what had happened during the battle. 4 of Taffy 3's ships were sunk. 850 sailors and airmen died, including 90 from the Samuel B. Roberts. However, After 2 hours, the Japanese commander, having overestimated the opposing force, ordered his ships to withdraw. And perhaps the most one-sided engagement in naval history, the underdog American tin cans had carried the day.
Commander Copeland, in his after-action battle report, he wrote that his men had performed superbly. In fact, he wrote, "There can be no higher honor than to have commanded a crew of such men."
No higher honor would become the motto for another crew and another USS Samuel B. Roberts. And like those heroic sailors in the Philippines, this new group would unexpectedly find themselves in a life and death struggle, this time in the Persian Gulf. In preparation for their upcoming deployment to South America, a U.S. Coast Guard detachment has embarked onto the Roberts. Together, they'll simulate the procedures of protocol used in apprehending suspected criminals.
The Navy is not allowed to do law enforcement activity on the water. By the Coast Guard coming on board, the Coast Guard actually becomes a law enforcement entity that allows the Navy to conduct these boardings.
If he makes a move, let us know. We might be able to see something before we do.
What we're working on are the command and control aspects, maneuvering the ship to be in position to intercept that suspect vessel.
16,400
We're practicing worst-case scenarios as well, where we may utilize some sort of warning if the boat refuses to stop.
From a distance of nearly 10 miles, radar operators in the Roberts Central Control Station watch suspected drug smugglers.
Contacts at 10,000 RPM, visuals off the port bow.
While the officer of the deck maneuvers his ship to intercept the suspect's speedboat, below deck, the Central Control Station communicates off-ship to obtain all the necessary permissions.
Whether or not the vessel that we're trying to board is a registered vessel with another country, we have to get the permission of that country to board the vessel. Waiting on the LEDET personnel to come up to the pilot house.
The LEDET, or Law Enforcement Detachment Team, is the Coast Guard crew stationed aboard the Roberts. Prior to any search and seizure, the Roberts transfers its authority to the Coast Guard.
5 miles out, sir. I'm going to board you. 5 miles. Yep, 5 miles out. First, then say it in Spanish. Channel 17.
If the go-fast boat refuses commands to stop, the officer of the deck alerts the chief gunner's mate out on deck.
The force protection officer is going to give the engagement commands from the 03 level. He's going to have them use some warning shots.
If the suspect vessel continues refusing to stop, a sniper armed with an M14 will fire disabling shots. Today's counter-narco-terrorism drill involved the combined efforts of dozens of crew members, multiple government agencies, and several foreign governments. It is one of the most complex and crew-intensive missions aboard any frigate. On the other hand, one of the least intensive assignments takes place topside. Rain or shine, a sailor must always stand watch, scanning the horizon for anything suspicious.
We stand 6 on, 12 off, or three watch sections right now. This is my UI. He's under instruction. I'm teaching him how to stand a proper watch. Recording contacts, how far are they, what they look like, if they're friendly, if they're not.
Standing watch out on the high seas might seem tedious, but the crew aboard the Roberts takes it very seriously. They are well aware that in 1988, a seaman on watch spotted something unusual, something that threatened the entire crew and ship. Following the sinking of the Sammy B during World War II, the U.S. Navy refused to let the name die. In 1946, the Navy commissioned a second USS Samuel B. Roberts.
The second Samuel B. Roberts, DD-823, was given the nickname Steaming Sammy B because she was always on the go, always doing this, that, the other.
The second Sammy B sailed with the 1st Naval Squadron through the St. Lawrence Seaway, helped blockade Soviet ships during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and earned battle stars for operations off Vietnam. But unlike her predecessor, the second Samuel B. Roberts eventually went down without a fight. In 1970, the Naval Inspection and Survey Team ruled her unfit for further service. The following year, the second Sammy B was unceremoniously sunk as a training target off the coast of Puerto Rico.
The Navy refused to let the name Samuel B. Roberts float off into retirement, and so in 1984 they launched the third Samuel B. Roberts, FFG 58.
Like her predecessor, the third Sammy B would find herself on the world stage. In 1988, the Iran-Iraq War had spilled into the Gulf, threatening oil shipments in and out of the region.
Our job and our direction from Admiral S to prevent those attacks from taking place and to guarantee free shipping throughout the Persian Gulf.
It was apparent from the very first night that they were in a very, very dangerous part of the world. You had Iraqi warplanes armed with missiles, you had Iranian warships running around firing their guns, and worst of all was the threat of mines.
On April 14th, the Roberts dropped off 2 tankers in Kuwait and headed back south.
It was about 4:30 on a cloudy day when the lookout on the forecastle of the Roberts spotted floating objects in front, and he called up to the bridge.
The phone in my cabin rang, and I picked it up, and the first words out of my officer of the deck's mouth was, "Captain, I think we have some mines."
The ship shuddered to a halt as Wren raced up to the bridge. 3 mines were clearly visible. The Roberts had entered a minefield of undetermined size and scope. The time was 4:39 p.m.
There isn't any school that tells you what to do to get out of a minefield, nor is there any school that tells you how the minefields are laid. We reported it to Combat East Force. They quickly came back and told us not to get within 1,000 yards of them. That didn't help much.
Out on the flight deck, Bob Bent was exercising when Captain Wren began speaking over the 1MC.
He just said, we're in a minefield and we're going to go ahead and proceed to general quarters. To go from just exercising 1 minute to knowing that you're in a minefield, it was kind of overwhelming. It just hit you like a ton of bricks.
Wren's options were limited. A ship at sea can't simply stop in place. Moving several feet in any direction might mean hitting a mine. Potentially worse was the fact the Roberts would be a sitting duck for enemy warplanes and surface craft.
We had about 55 minutes of daylight left, and I didn't really want to be in this position in a minefield if it got dark.
So Wren thought about it for a little while, and he said, okay, well, we got in, we can get out. Because back behind him was this pale white trail all the way back to Kuwait.
I wanted to back directly down that wake and be straight right in the heart of it.
So Wren gave the order to back out. But the problem was that the Roberts had a blunt stern, a 1 screw, and 1 rudder. It makes backing the ship hydrodynamically akin to throwing a paper airplane backwards. It's just very, very difficult to back out in a straight line.
Down in Central Control, Chief Engineer of the Watch, Dave Walker, passed word down to the ship's lowest level. Everyone working in the lowest decks of the ship needs to immediately come up a level.
The one thing that comes forward in a moment like this more than anything else is that those 214 guys on the ship believe that you're the guy with the answer. And they trust in you that you're the one who's going to find the way out.
time was very slow. It seemed like we would never get out of there.
In the process of backing and being very confident that we could get out of the minefield, suddenly the largest explosion that I've seen in my entire naval service took place.
I just went flying in the air and really was disoriented.
And the sound is very different than the sound you hear in the movies. It's not a booming sound, it's a cracking sound.
It was 250 pounds of TNT going off right next to the hull, and it put a truck-sized hole in the ship below the waterline, and the engine room filled immediately.
It filled that space with water in probably 10 seconds. So we went from being a 4,000-ton frigate to a 6,000-ton frigate in about 30 seconds.
We're now standing inside the main engine room, or the MER. Inside the space, when the mine struck, the whole level that we're standing on right now was covered by either salt water or fuel, and that fuel was hot. The fuel was on fire, and the water was coming through that bulkhead that's right behind me.
The mine explosion also blew out a seal around the shaft extending from the MER into the auxiliary space behind it, called AUX 3. It too flooded within seconds.
When this space flooded, it caused the ship service diesel generators to shut off, to kick off of line, and it caused the ship to go dark.
So not only were the main engines disintegrated and the space full with water and on fire, and most of our electrical grid wiped out, but the main space behind it that had additional electrical power, refrigeration units, evaporators, and water capability was also destroyed, all within the space of about 50 seconds.
But what was more, the ship was also on fire, because when that mine went off, it sent super hot gases into the engine room. And these gases expanded and went up through the ship's air ducts, setting fires on 4 decks as they went along, until they finally burst from the ship's stack in a huge fireball.
The Middle East Force Headquarters alerts the Roberts. Help is on the way. But Commander Wren tells them to stay away. They are in a minefield, without any way of determining its size. The Roberts will have to save herself.
All right, team leader, everybody ready?
Aboard any ship, damage control is the responsibility of all hands. Without proper damage control training, sailors may die and the ship may be lost. On the Samuel B. Roberts, damage control exercises are performed every day.
Toxic gas leak. CHD pump room, 4 tech 160 tech 0.
It is the responsibility of the DC team to control the flow of information, map the problem areas, identify safe boundaries, and keep in contact with the first responders.
All personnel in the vicinity of CHD pump room, evacuate the area immediately. Fire must record 1-inch by 4-inch rupture on number 1 CHD pump piping. The CHD pump room is the cause of the leak.
In this drill, everything worked smoothly. But back in 1988, when the Roberts struck the mine, damage control suddenly faced conditions no one had ever imagined.
Wasn't really sure we could save the ship. Why? Well, you're sinking at the rate of a foot every 5 minutes. You're burning and you can't stop the flames because you don't have any water to fight the fires with. You don't know how many of your guys are dead. It's getting dark. The nearest guys to you are your adversaries and they're armed. You're in a damn minefield and the 3 you see are not the ones that got you and you don't know how many more there are. Oh, and by the way, the sharks just showed up and so did the sea snakes. So you're having a great day.
Without power, the central control and damage control teams were blind. Fire suppression systems failed to engage. Radar and communications consoles designed to survive a total power failure were not working. The crew had never trained for this scenario.
We're here in CCS, or Central Control Station, on board the Samuel B. Roberts. When the ship actually struck the mine, the whole ship went dark, and the people in here were scurrying or quickly trying to figure out how to get electricity back to the ship. We needed to be able to pump the water out of the spaces that were flooding. Also inside the space, they would have been trying to get the fire pumps back online in order to get the firefighting water that we need to fight the fires that were going on throughout the ship.
One of those manning central control was Bob Bent.
I just got up and went right to the electric plant and tried to do whatever I could to keep the power on, which it didn't. Tried to get down to auxiliary machinery room 2 to get at the engines to try to get power back, because that was my charge. I stepped into the space and it was a fella named Larry Welch, and he looked really bad, burnt. He's just really in bad shape. And I helped him out of the space and brought him back to the after repair locker to get him some help. And then I went back to seal that door off. And when I had heard another voice in there, and I heard someone yelling for help.
Chief Petty Officer Alex Perez was trapped underneath the floor grate and up to his neck in burning, fuel-soaked water.
We told Al he's going to have to go underneath all these cables and swim underneath it to get up. And he knew. We showed him where it was, and he did, and he got out.
About 5-6 minutes into it, the lights start to flicker, just like the movie Titanic. But in Titanic, they went out. On Samuel B. Roberts, they go back on. Nobody knows why they go back on. Nobody knows how we got power back to the grid. How did we start one of those damn diesel engines?
Right now, we're in Ox 1. This is the space where there was the only last generator. All the other generators were taken out by the mine.
Well, it's Tilly, a fireman, who goes into the diesel enclosure and looks up and sees that the diesel governor has been shattered and that the diesel cannot be started in an automatic.
So the guy had to come down into space. He had to do a local start. We call it a dead man start because he had to go inside of the closure, which is very dangerous. So he went inside and actually started that diesel up.
We get power back to the grid. The first thing we do is we energize the missile launcher and we cycle a missile, we bring it up. Lo and behold, we can shoot.
The crew was down here trying to prevent this bulkhead behind me from buckling or any more water from coming inside this space. So they were erecting shoring and putting whatever they could inside the holes and cracks.
But I saw guys down in that space. They were using everything imaginable to control the flooding.
35 minutes after the mine explosion, Wren received word the flooding in AMR-2 was contained. But somehow, the Roberts continued to sink.
And suddenly it dawns on me, we're sinking ourselves. We're putting more water on the ship than we're pumping off the ship.
The fires were burning out of control, but Captain Wren knew that the only way to save the Roberts was to stop fighting the fires. "40 minutes after striking the mine, damage control teams had secured the flooding, but fires burned out of control across 4 decks. The Roberts is also sinking. The huge amounts of seawater used to douse the fires were actually causing her to sink. Wren's decision to cease all firefighting efforts stuns his executive officer.
I'll say this in a much nicer fashion than he said. He asked me if I had lost my mind. And I had told him that we were sinking like a rock and that we had about another 45 minutes to an hour to live. And if we didn't stop the sinking, we wouldn't have to worry about the fires anymore because the ocean was going to put them out.
Wren's gamble paid off. In only a few minutes, the water level began to hold steady. enabling the damage control crew to resume fighting the fires. Then, Wren decided to roll the dice once more.
We had kept the ship from sinking any further. We had to deal with the fire, but we had to get out of that minefield.
Wren ordered the auxiliary power units powered up and turned the ship to course 147. As the Roberts limped for safety, the blazes that had burned aboard the frigate for over 4 hours were at last extinguished.
I think it was the first time in all of that evolution that we said, I think we've done this. I think we've saved the ship. I think we've saved ourselves.
The morning after the Roberts escaped the minefield, the Navy sent divers to recover some of these floating weapons. And they traced the serial numbers on those mines to Iran and sent the news all the way back to Washington, up to the White House. And President Reagan vowed revenge.
4 days after the mining of the Roberts, the Navy launched Operation Praying Mantis, a combined air and surface attack on the Iranian military.
This was a day-long battle in which U.S. ships and airplanes went after Iranian forces. And by the end of the day, they had put one Iranian frigate to the bottom, heavily damaged another, sunk a couple of armed power boats, put 2 Iranian oil platforms out of commission. It was the biggest surface warfare action since World War II.
The success of Operation Praying Mantis helped convince Iran that it could not prevail in its war with Iraq. 3 months after the Roberts was struck, Tehran agreed to a ceasefire that ended this bloody conflict that had stretched on for 8 years.
But the ripples don't stop there, because the ceasefire allowed Saddam Hussein to pull his troops away from the Iranian border, and 2 years later, he sent them into Kuwait. And this, of course, engendered Operation Desert Storm, which was the first time that the U.S. and Iraq came into direct conflict.
After returning home, the U.S. Navy restored the USS Samuel B. Roberts to its former glory and deployed her back out to sea.
I am a United States sailor. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America.
Today, the heroic history of the Sammy B lives on, and as the new crew trains for their deployment to South America, reminders to train for the unexpected can be found below deck. There, mounted on the wall, is a bronze plaque honoring those who sailed aboard the first Sammy B. It was placed there by the commander of the 3rd USS Samuel B. Roberts, Paul Wren.
The captain closed his report saying of the Roberts, "We saved her, we'll fix her, and we'll fight again." And he signed off with their motto, "No higher honor."
Big ships get all the honor. Small ships don't hear too much of them. We did something that they never did. We fought the Jap fleet and more or less nailed the coffin on the Japanese fleet.
During the mine explosion, crew members passing by touched it and remembered those heroic sailors.
Their fighting will has been passed on to me to protect the ship for my term and future sailors who will come onto the ship and serve our country.
The crew to this day, they're still out there doing it. They're living up to the heritage from the 1st and 2nd ships that were named Roberts and Sammy B himself.
It was a ship that believed they played and worked and acted in a legacy. And I think that that was something that we drove home every day on board the ship. Integrity, pride, honesty, hard work, and absolute, total, unadulterated pride in who they were and what the name of the ship meant.
But quite frankly, there is no higher honor than being the commanding officer of the Samuel B. Roberts.